Tonight on Free Minds TV, we're going to be getting into an article that blames libertarianism for the current financial collapse. We're also going to be getting into the ACLU making a request for information about domestic deployments of the U.S. military. We'll be bringing you the Downsizer Dispatch and a story about a botched raid that took place in Orlando, Florida, plus a whole lot more, all tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
We've got a couple of big announcements before we get started with the show. We've got a lot to talk about today, but just wanted to let some of the viewers know what's going on this week with Free Minds TV. We're going to be having a couple of bonus appearances. The first one will take place this Saturday, so if you're just watching this show when it first comes out, if you're watching this a week from Saturday, which is Pumpkin Fest, the 25th of October, well, you can check it out at freemindstv.com. But if you are watching this beforehand, we will be live at Pumpkin Festival. This is October 25th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can watch that live at cheshiretv.org. It'll be live streaming up there, and then it'll be posted later. But we will be live from there. Also, another big announcement, we'll be at Keene Freedom Fest. I think this is the third one. They do it a few times a year. We are helping to put it on. That's going to be on Railroad Square in downtown Keene the following day after Pumpkin Fest, October 26th. We'll be there from 11 till just about before 2 when we have to go and do Free Minds Radio. But we will be there filming. There's going to be a whole lot of other people there from New Hampshire Coalition for Common Sense Marijuana Policy. We've got all sorts of vendors who are coming out, live music. There may be some maybe illegal gambling, all sorts of fun liberty-related stuff. That'll be going on from 11 to 2 p.m. on Sunday, the 26th of October. Check it out, and we'll also have some footage that we'll be showing next week on Free Minds TV. A lot of good fun, and if you want to see everything that's going to be going on at this fall's Keene Freedom Fest, go to keenfreedomfest.com. It's all posted on there. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be interesting. And since there's no permits pulled up, it'll be very interesting to see what happens and see how the city reacts to all this. So I'm looking forward to it. And so if you're watching this on time, maybe come on by and check it out.
Yeah, it's always been a good time in the past, so I expect this year to be even better, actually. There's been a lot of effort put into making it a really good event. Yeah,
and there's all sorts of groups. Some groups that are going want to be staying right in the system, working in the system, helping getting pro-liberty candidates elected to New Hampshire rep, and really working in the system. And there's other groups, such as Anarchy in Your Head's going to be there, who publishes an anarchist comic strip at anarchyinyourhead.com. And then there's going to be even maybe some civil disobedience with some illegal gambling could be going on. I know last time they had a Keene Freedom Fest, some people were gambling with pennies. The police were there. They saw the illegal gambling going on and just walked on by, so it'll be interesting to see what the police do about it this time. And people are standing up and saying, you know what, we're not hurting anyone by spending $2 on gambling. Last time the city was completely fine with it, and so it'll be interesting to see if they are this time, if they're so forgiving. So anyways, we'll be bringing you the updates on that, or if you're around, check it out. All right, but we do have a lot to talk about. There's been a lot going on. One thing that we've been talking about is what's going on with the military, Nick, and some of the new stuff that's been coming out. Previously, they're only supposed to be going after people who are in other countries. But now they're operating inside the United States, or at least have the ability to operate inside the United States?
Right. Now there's a full-time Army unit that's been assigned to Northern Command, which is basically a command structure that was created after September 11th for response within the United States. Now, this is kind of unusual, because up until now, at least in recent U.S. history, we've always relied on the National Guard in whatever state you happen to be in, and before that we rely on civilian authorities. But for some reason, the administration now feels that it's time to bring a full-time active duty military unit into a homeland role, and it was actually reported in the Army Times that their mission would relate to crowd control and civil unrest, and it is combat brigade. It's not a support role. This isn't a military unit that's, a medical unit or something like that. This is actually a combat brigade that basically dealt with the insurgency in Iraq and crowd control in Iraq. So it is very disconcerting that they're bringing this type of a unit into the United States, supposedly to use for civil unrest and crowd control. Now, the Pentagon has been backing down, basically trying to backpedal and say that the unit's not going to be used, against crowds of civilians. It's going to be used in a support role for civilian authorities. I don't know what kind of a support role combat troops offer to civilian authorities except breaking up crowds or shooting people.
Now, is this constitutional? I'm not too familiar on all constitutional law and what goes on, but I thought that the military was supposed to operate outside the United States, and the National Guard could come in and help out inside the United States, but the military was supposed to be strictly against foreign aggressors and not in with the American people.
Yes, that was the founding intention. The people who created the Constitution did believe that a standing army was dangerous to liberty. But actually, military troops can even be quartered in your home if there's an act of Congress. It can't be done in peacetime without an act of Congress, but it can be during a time of war or
through like if we're getting invaded or something?
If we're getting invaded or if Congress passes law.
Oh, I mean, so they can just do it?
They could. Since this end of the Civil War, with Reconstruction, there's been a law in the books, Posse Comitatus, which basically said that military would no longer be used to control the civilian population. We were no longer in the state of war within the United States. And since then, it's been adhered to fairly well. But this is kind of a change, and things are changing. The idea is that we're always at a state of war now, even if it hasn't officially been declared. So, and with acts like the Military Commissions Act and certain other legislation, the president can pretty much declare a state of emergency and use the military however he wants within the U.S.
Wow. So this is a pretty big step, something that we haven't seen since the 1800s, since the later 1800s with the end of the Civil War. And are these a special training that's going to be going on with these troops, or is it the same training that the same troops that are fighting over in Afghanistan and Iraq are getting, or is there something special, or are they not really saying at this point?
Well, it was reported that the unit was going to train with less than lethal equipment, and they were going to be equipped with this. So things like tear gas, I believe there were some tasers, crowd control devices. So they're not, they will be issued small arms, supposedly only for their own protection if they're attacked as a unit or as individuals. So they probably will have deadly weapons at their disposal. And they are also training with, things like rubber bullets and tear gas. Now, the ACLU has filed a 9-page Freedom of Information Act request. They're trying to get any documents that relate to this decision to deploy this unit inside the U.S. So, maybe they'll uncover some kind of ill intent, but really, I mean, it seems pretty clear just from the fact that this unit's being assigned a U.S. role that there is some intention to use them for crowd control.
Right.
So I don't know that the ACLU finding that out, finding the smoking gun for that is going to make a whole lot of a difference.
Yeah, see, to me this is a huge deal. This is a pretty big step in America as far as freedom goes. So it's something that I think people should actually be caring about. It's a big deal to say that military can be deployed to the streets to do crowd control or whatever. If they're deployed inside the United States, that's a pretty big deal. And unfortunately, I think this is going to be one of those things that's just the American people don't really notice because it's not affecting you right now. You don't see the effects of it immediately. It's something of just down the line. It might be just a regular thing to have active military deployed in the streets and maybe on a corner holding a machine gun or something like you see in National Geographics in other countries. But now that could actually be happening in the United States, and it could be something that just becomes normal. And if people aren't standing up and actually saying something about it. So I hope some people will actually become vocal about this and say, you know what, this is an issue that matters because it really does affect our liberty and our freedom here. Maybe you don't see it immediately, but it is a big deal.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's only been during extreme states of emergency, really, where the National Guard has been called up, and they, by and large, they haven't been used for crowd control. So the very idea that it's acceptable, the idea to use military forces against the American people, you really crossed the line there, where the government is essentially regarding the people themselves, everyday citizens, as a threat. So, you know, we've come to the stage where certain people are labeled terrorists or security threats, and now they're basically taking the view that the American people at large could pose a threat to basically to the government.
Right.
The government tends to defend itself, not necessarily the people.
Well, I would urge the viewers to contact their representatives. I don't know how much they actually represent people, and they'll listen to you, but hey, at least you're having your voice be heard, or maybe do something else. Protesting always can be fun as well. Just speak up and let your voice be heard, so this is another issue that just dies out, and someday it's normal to just have military lining the street. Anyway, speaking of having your voice be heard, we like to do a little segment called the Downsizer Dispatch. Nick, what is this week's Downsizer Dispatch? What can the American people do to at least have their voice be heard a little bit by their representatives and those boneheads in Washington?
Well, this week's Downsizer Dispatch deals with the economy. Again, it's obviously a big issue. It's a #1 issue that people are considering when they go to vote this year. I don't know how much voting's going to do, because as the Downsizer Dispatch says, they've been hammering on Republicans for years, and they've richly deserved it. Soon it will be the Democrats' turn, and they too will richly deserve it. We're beginning to see that what Democratic control will look like. It will look a lot like Republican control, and not a whole lot seems to change when you're going from one major party to the other. They're pretty close to each other. They both believe in government intervention in the markets at this point. There are certain members of the parties, like Ron Paul, who does not. But by and large, a Democratic Congress is probably going to do most of the same things that a Republican Congress is going to do. And they're just getting into here. Now the Congress is looking at passing a second stimulus package for the economy. Now, some people thought the first stimulus package this year was a good idea. But essentially, if you think about what happened, was it wasn't free money given back to the taxpayers. It was money that the government spent out of the Treasury that it didn't have. But they're not just going to reduce spending to make up for that. It's just more debt that the government's created. So they're basically giving it to the American people now, but the American people are going to have to pay back that part of the budget deficit with interest in the future. So they're just moving money around. It's really just bean pushing. And in the end, it serves the government interest, but not so much the people's interest. And they go on to talk about different things that this new stimulus package has been proposed to do. Expanded unemployment benefits. Well, will that stimulate the economy, or will that just cause people who are out of a job to sit around longer and draw benefits rather than hurrying up and finding a job? Expanded food stamps. Basically the same thing as expanded unemployment benefits. Is that really going to encourage people to find a job if they're on hard times? And also, they're going to expand expenditures on infrastructure. Well, will they actually be beneficial projects, or are they just going to be make-work projects like we saw during the Great Depression, or more bridges to nowhere? I think most of the time the government's very inefficient where it spends money, and infrastructure is no exception. So basically, what the solution is in this case, I mean, the hope for the election is probably pretty much gone. You can vote third party, which I would recommend if you're going to vote at all. Sort of a protest vote, but really we're going to have either a Democrat or Republican-controlled Congress. What you can do is try to exert some influence on representatives who are there and new ones coming in. So go to downsizedc.org, and you can use their Cut Spending campaign to try to address the real problems that underlie this economic crisis, and that's government overspending. And we'll probably get into that a little bit later in the show. But for those of you who are familiar with this program, we lay out a pretty consistent case that most of the things that stifle the economy are either done by the central bank or they're done by Congress in terms of overspending. So go to downsizedc.org. It's probably the best way to make your voice heard on the national stage. And slowly but surely, there are more and more people sending messages. And if enough people are doing that, it will have some impact.
Yeah, and even if it's not the best way, it is definitely the fastest, maybe the best and the fastest. I know if you sign up, for me it takes 20 seconds to send a message out like this. Simply log in. They have the letter written for you. You can write your own if you want, but if not, just a couple of mouse clicks and your voice is heard. All right, when we come back, it's hard to get away from it, but we will be talking about it, the economic crisis, and how libertarians could play a role into this. So some people think that they're responsible. We'll be talking about that, as well as a whole lot more when we come back. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com.
Am I on? Am I on? Do I talk now? Do I talk now? I'm Gardner Goldsmith, and
I think she's up by where they're doing the show.
you're watching Free Minds TV. Open your mind, baby. Tell others to do the same.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. We'd like to invite the viewers to log on to our website, freemindstv.com. From there, you have all sorts of stuff about the show, ways to help the show, donate to the show, the members section, which has all sorts of bonus content on it, only $3 a month or $30 a year, as well as the Free Minds TV and Free Minds Radio updates. It's all there at freemindstv.com. Stay tuned, stay up to date with what's happening with the show. All right, Nick, it's impossible to get away from it nowadays. The economic crisis, it's all over the news, but we like to take a kind of different approach from it. We've been talking about the real reasons for the economic crisis and how it's not the free market that's to blame. It's government intrusion in the first place in this monetary system that's backed up by nothing that's caused all this, but still some people think that it's the libertarians' fault. So let's get into this article. I know you've picked it out, you've been going over it. Why do some people think libertarians are responsible for this whole depression?
Well, it's probably because a lot of the blame has been laid at the feet of banks and financial institutions that are profit-driven. So people assume that it was a problem of deregulation. And one person making that case was Jacob Weisberg. And I read that original article. I have to say it wasn't the most convincing. But this is pretty typical. When government programs fail, people tend to get frustrated, and they actually blame freedom itself. So some other examples would be when gun control actually fails to reduce gun crime. Well, somebody gets shot, well, they call for more gun control, which is in turn not effective, and they call for yet more gun control. And you can look at the war on drugs. I mean, narco-terrorism in Mexico kills a lot of people. There's all kinds of black market violence in the United States, and drug usage rates don't drop, despite the fact that we have very strict drug laws. What do people do? Well, they don't call for changing policy. The government tries, to beat the drum for yet more drug laws, and the cycle just tends to feed off of itself. Well, it's a pretty asinine assumption to say that libertarian ideas created the crisis, because libertarians haven't been in control of government at all in the last 30 years. I mean, if you can name
more than 100.
Right.
I think, since the beginning of the country, since its foundation, I think libertarian ideas have been slipping away from the institution and the government ever since its creation. It was created with a whole lot of libertarian ideals. But then they've kind of dwindled away. In the last 30 years, we haven't had any at all, it seems.
Right, and I mean, Anthony Gregory over at LouRockwell.com wrote kind of a rebuttal article, and he makes a point that it's absurd to even say that this state really could be run by libertarians to some extent, because the state is only libertarian in as much as it ceases to be government. So libertarians would advocate abolishing a good chunk of government. They don't really have a whole lot of government programs that they're promoting. And at the root of the problem is the fact that the money supply is essentially controlled by government. It's actually controlled by the Federal Reserve, which is sort of a semi-private central bank. But the world money supply, I was listening on NPR, the world money supply had about doubled over the last several years. I mean, the amount of money that was available for investment. And that was one of the reasons you saw the stock market skyrocket. I mean, there was no reason for the stock market to add thousands and thousands of points in just a few years' time. The real economy had not grown that much. It wasn't reflective of anything accurate in the real economy, except the fact that there was more money floating around. And I think a lot of people still haven't realized that. And you also saw many people dumping money into investment properties because they had so much money to invest. I mean, at the higher levels in the economy, there were a lot of hedge funds, there were a lot of investors who had a whole lot of money to invest, and they were looking for any way they could get a yield on their investment. And really, these subprime mortgage packages, the derivatives market, these things were really cooked up as a place to put all this free money floating around. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, I would contend that the fact that there was so much more money available for investment over a short period of time is the reason there was malinvestment. It wasn't that investors suddenly became stupid. They just had a lot of money and they needed somewhere to put it. And so the government had every opportunity to regulate this. This just points out why government regulation does not work. I mean, the government has been regulating the financial market one way or another, especially since the Great Depression. I mean, there's always been some form of regulation for the most part. It was much, much smaller at one point. But especially since the Great Depression, there's always been this kind of regulation. And obviously, the government blew it. I mean, the government had the incentive to really create more home ownership. And home ownership rates in the United States, I think, at the peak were like 70%. Historically, that's a little too high. I mean, usually it's more like 60%. That might not sound like much of a difference, but you're talking about millions of Americans owning homes who probably shouldn't have. And the politicians had an incentive to say that more people own homes than ever before, so they really didn't have any reason to rein this in. The same people who are arguing for bailouts and government intervention now, like Barney Frank, were the same ones who were saying that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were sound just a couple years ago. So the people arguing for intervention now didn't see this problem coming. I don't know why we would listen to them when they were wrong over the last several years. Really, the only people who saw this coming, I mean, there were a handful of maybe of politicians. Ron Paul was one who was predicting this years ago. Even before the year 2000, he was predicting that this bubble was being created and it would burst. Sadly, people aren't listening to his ideas. And there were economists out there like Peter Schiff and others who were predicting exactly the same thing. But they were marginalized too. So if it were up to me, I'd say we should listen to the people who saw this coming. And pretty much the solution they're offering is to let the market work, which means to let banks fail. Yes, people will lose jobs. Yes, the economy is going to go through a rough patch no matter what we do. But the healthiest thing for the economy in any kind of a long-term view is to let it fix itself.
Yeah, let's not kick the can down the road for, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 years down the road and then have a bigger problem to solve. Let's take care of it now, flush it out, and yeah, it might hurt for some, but at least we'd be dealing with something that's more realistic of what the economy should look like.
Right, and it's not even necessarily a case of do we kick it down the can or do we take the pain now. The Depression was strung out largely by FDR's policies, and that's the opinion I take, and there's a lot of economists out there who agree with that the New Deal essentially lengthened the Depression, and it didn't allow the economy to correct itself because they were trying to prop up prices and things like that. So we might still see a collapse. A lot of people are saying that the financial crisis is over. Well, the stock market didn't keep dropping. It's kind of been languishing at what is now the bottom, but there's no guarantee that we aren't going to see some very rough times over the next few years. The government might not even be able to delay the pain. They're very inefficient at trying to interfere in the economy. It doesn't work out well.
Right. Anyways, we'll continue to report on this and hopefully clarify for people who are confused. Yes, when you have a money system that's not backed by anything, it's just monopoly money, it messes things up. I mean, try playing a game of Monopoly and then putting in double the money or 3 times the money. Yeah, everyone can afford a hotel, but the game doesn't really work out. You can't just create funny money and think things should work out. And
the only people who've been pointing that out over the last couple of decades have largely been libertarians and free market economists. So right. It's really the interventionists who failed to predict this problem, and they're just trying to pass the buck. But honestly, this time I think it'll be different than the Great Depression. I think people are a little bit more educated now, and we might be able to actually put the blame where it belongs, which is on government intervention. Let's hope so. Let's hope that the people actually wake up and look into the problem and not just think that, well, it's what the talking heads on the news stations say it is, because they're just about as confused as anyone else. Anyways, we have one more article we want to get to.
is coming from Orlando, Florida, a little bit of police state action where a grandfather is planning on filing complaints against the Orlando Police Department. He said he released this Friday, claiming that officers stormed into his home on Cynthia Street in Orlando Thursday and broke down every door while there was an infant inside. The police were looking for the grandfather's grandson, who is 20 years old, used to live with him, hasn't lived with him for 6 years. So they came in with a search warrant looking for him, kicked down the doors. Of course, you can't just knock and have the police come to your door anymore when there's a search warrant. They've got to kick it in, no-knock raids, blast in with tear gas, surround the place, point weapons at the poor grandfather's house while there's an infant sleeping in a room with tear gas in it. Well, when the police found out that the grandson no longer lived there, the grandfather simply called his grandson. The grandson came over. It turned out that they were looking for a stolen cell phone. The grandson had the stolen cell phone. He had bought it from some guy on the street, didn't know it was stolen, gave it back, and the matter was settled. But the point here is this no-knock raid scared the hell out of this poor grandfather and could have really hurt this infant. Luckily, the infant was okay, but why can't they just knock on the door? What's wrong with just knocking? Police, we're looking for your grandson. Have you seen him? Well, no, he doesn't live here for 6 years, but this is where you can look for him. Instead of kicking down all the doors, breaking all the glass, and filling the place up with tear gas. When did we switch to these no-knock raids and we've got to storm the place in order to see what's happening, Nick?
Over a stolen cell phone. I mean, that's what's the need? I mean, sometimes they make the argument that, well, we have to do no-knock raids for our safety. Well, are you really expecting that much of a showdown that you couldn't just show up with a couple of police officers and knock on the door over a stolen cell phone?
Yeah, they didn't even arrest the kid.
I mean, it was receiving stolen. I mean, he bought a hot cell phone off the street, and this is reason for launching tear gas into a house where you think he might be?
Yeah, and you don't do the research to see who might be inside the house? This is just dangerous. I mean, I think a lot of this came with the war on drugs. You got to kick down the door before people flush it, but there's no excuse here for that even. I disagree with that on the premise, but there's really just no excuse. It seems to be the mindset has switched from simply knocking and asking people information to kicking down their doors and filling their house up with smoke bombs and pointing semi-automatic weapons at people's heads.
Well, it has, and one of the reasons is that there's no personal liability for officers, or very little, if somebody gets killed or injured in these raids. The individual officer is not going to be held liable even if their actions were incorrect or reprehensible. That most of the time that's what we see. And there's also the fact that the police departments now have all of this equipment. So if you have a bunch of tear gas launchers and all this riot gear, you might be tempted to use it if you know you're not going to get in trouble for misusing.
Now, I'm amazed that they actually went out and did this. I mean, my dealings with the police when I've lost something or it's been stolen from me is I've filed reports before and gotten nowhere. But apparently they decided that this hot cell phone required the full Orlando SWAT team and decided to go raid this house. I mean, maybe they were just bored one day and had nothing else to do. But the point is, we don't need this. Let's get back to peace officers if we're going to have police officers. I know there's people out there who have all different varieties of opinions on this. Some people think that we should switch to private police or no police, or some police. How about we just get away from this SWAT team mentality if we need to kick down the doors? Let's start there and then we'll move back. But this is just insane. Anyways, we are out of time today. It's been a pleasure having you guys watch us. We appreciate it. We know some of you have different opinions. Probably a lot of you have different opinions. Send them to us. fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email address, or you can leave us a message on our talkback line, 206-350-0123. Once again, log on to our website, freemindstv.com. Check us out this Saturday at the Pumpkin Festival, live from 2 to 3 on Cheshire TV, cheshiretv.com.
.org. I think it might actually go to both. But.
And Keene Freedom Fest at keenfreedomfest.com will be there this Sunday, and also Free Minds Radio, which is right after Keene Freedom Fest from 3 to 5 p.m. live at freemindsradio.com. It's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great night. So,
Rhubarb.
Yeah.
Free Minds TV is brought to you by FreeKeen.com. FreeKeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. FreeKeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. FreeKeen.com.